and a goodbye. I should probably preface the story with a trigger warning. But I have a complicated relationship with the trigger warning. Most triggers are sneaky and unexpected and come utterly unannounced. If I don't get a warning, why should you? 7 years ago, we had 2 toddlers, and I still had an ache in my heart for one more. My husband Spencer would have been content with 2. These conversations had turned to me begging and him standing firm. We were also outgrowing our small St. Matthews Cape Cod, and I was constantly browsing Zillow. This late January Saturday afternoon, I found a home for sale online I was particularly in love with. It was out of our price range. Spencer told me, "It's beautiful, but we can't afford it. But if you really want to, we can have another baby." The logic here was not quite logicking, but lo and behold, we tried that afternoon, and wham bam, by Valentine's Day, I had a positive pregnancy test. Everything felt so easy and perfect. It felt as though it was written in the stars. I felt almost embarrassed how lucky we were in the face of friends who were experiencing fertility issues. We had a boy and a girl at home, and for the first time we decided that we would wait until the baby was born to find out the gender. I had a healthy pregnancy. The baby was due October 26th. We were so excited because Halloween was our favorite holiday. Well, Halloween came and went, and still no baby. I went as overdue for Halloween that year. Dark circles drawn under my eyes and a baby doll hidden under my shirt, attempting to look as miserable as I felt, not yet really knowing true misery. I was beginning to feel quite mad at this giant 10-pound baby who was making it difficult to breathe. October passed, and on the morning of November 1st, I got up and begrudgingly toured the kindergarten where my oldest would be attending the following fall. It was a regular day. I came home and was ready to pull out all the tips and tricks, so I mixed up a midwives brew tea recipe I found online. By the time I finished drinking the disgusting witch's brew, I was in active labor. My husband took his sweet-ass time getting home from work, assuming these things take a while, but this one would not. By the time we got to the hospital, I spent about an hour in the birthing tub before I was ready to push. I could tell this baby was coming faster than any of my previous babies. The contractions were more intense. I didn't have time to get up out of the water, so I stood up and my midwife Tamara caught Archer. "It's a boy!" She cut the cord and I got out of the tub and headed for the bed. He didn't cry immediately. She was jostling him. Eventually he started crying and they brought him to me and laid him on my chest. I remember him looking up at me, but I don't remember the relaxing energy I had with the others. It felt like he had fear in his eyes. He didn't feel content. He was staring at me like a deer in headlights. Spencer called our moms to tell them, "It's a boy." He never took a picture, a detail that will always haunt me. He was busy sharing the good news. He thought he had more time. We had no way of knowing that the minutes were ticking. Archer began breathing more loudly after a couple of minutes. a whistle breath, they called it. The nurse midwife came over to take him and see if she could suction him. She took him from me for the last time. As she carried him to the table, he collapsed in her arms. We would later learn he had a massive heart attack. They performed 33 minutes of CPR in the room with us. It never really occurred to me at first that we were losing him. I suppose I was in shock. I didn't know what I thought was happening. My brain couldn't let me fathom losing him. We were so lucky. How could we be so unlucky? About halfway through the CPR, a doctor came over and asked us if they could call it. And that's when it really sunk in. No, I cried. So they kept going, breaking his little body with every thrust. And finally, they got back a heartbeat. We said goodbye to him as they transferred him to the Children's Hospital, where he would immediately undergo surgery and be placed on ECMO while they cooled his body to try and minimize brain damage and figure out what went wrong with his heart. It wasn't until his autopsy that we would learn that he had an incredibly rare heart condition that has only been reported 38 times in history. One tiny artery out of place. A condition that could have never been caught in utero or treated, even if it had been. I had a psychic tell me that his life was meant to be this way. And not in a condescending, this was all part of God's plan. She said he knew that he was only going to live inside of me. He knew he was only here for a short time. And it didn't feel like psychic bullshit, because this quite literally was always meant to be this way. For 9 months, I carried an otherwise beautiful, perfect little baby with a broken heart. For 9 months, he was all mine. We lived our 2 worst days of our lives that week, 4 days apart. The first was the heart attack. The second was November 5th, when they assessed his brain damage and delivered the news that it was catastrophic. We let his older brother and sister come to the hospital to meet him and say goodbye. They didn't understand. Their little faces in pictures were so curious and inquisitive. They wanted him to come home. After they left, we removed ECMO and held him while he slipped away. Leaving the body of my sweet baby in that hospital room that day was the most gut-wrenching goodbye I hope I ever experience. I felt like the whale who carried her baby for 17 days because she couldn't say goodbye. In the immediate aftermath, I felt extremely competitive in my grief. This felt like the worst thing that has ever happened to anyone. I called my midwife on Thanksgiving Day and asked her to walk me through the day, minute by minute. I needed to put the pieces of the puzzle together. I remember she was grocery shopping at Trader Joe's and she told me every detail. At the end of the conversation, she told me, "This was the worst day of my career. I've had moms who didn't make it, and I've had babies who didn't make it. I've never had such a seemingly healthy mom with a seemingly healthy pregnancy and delivery and have the baby code so unexpectedly. This was the most shocking day for me too. At that time, the detail was oddly validating and it brought me peace. I told my husband and he said, "Why would that make me feel better? I don't need someone to tell me that this is the worst thing that's ever happened, Maggie." I don't know why I did. This wasn't the first time we found ourselves grieving very differently and wouldn't be the last. As time went on, I realized there's no good way to lose a child. Thanks to my new griefy Instagram algorithm, I now also know that there are millions of people in this world experiencing the worst thing that could ever happen. I'm actually not that special after all. I've also seen how grief changes over time. We said goodbye to Archer on November 5th, 2018, but in so many ways, he's still very much alive. He lives in the faces of my other children, always imagining what he would look like now. He lives in the conversations we continue to have, and every time we say his name. He lives in the butterflies and the cardinals and the beautiful Dia de los Muertos celebration we have for him every year on his birthday. I can almost always talk about him now without crying. This is how I parent him, by continuing to talk about him. And that's why I refuse to preface him with a trigger warning. He's not a trigger, he's my son. He's completely shaped who we are to this day. His brief life shook me to my core. It devastated me and also taught me the invaluable lesson of human resilience. I don't believe that things happen for a reason, some predestined plan written in the stars to teach you a lesson. I do believe that terrible things happen and joy will always follow. At first you feel like you will never smile again, not in the same way you used to smile. How could you ever feel that happy again? And then you see a picture of yourself smiling, really smiling again. The joy on your face feels almost bittersweet. I believe that some people who have experienced the lowest of lows are given a more beautiful lens to see the world. And that is the gift he has given us. And that doesn't go away. Maybe his life was written in the stars. And maybe I'm still figuring out what it all means.